Welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining us today. The South African Bar Association hosts a speaker on a weekly basis to deal with a legal or advocacy-related topic intended to assist legal practitioners and any interested persons, and by so doing, improve the quality of legal representation in our courts. These sessions are presented at no cost to participants. Today, we are honored to be hosting clinical psychologist Ruth Ancer as our speaker. Before we start, some housekeeping. Kindly mute yourselves and keep your camera off during the presentation. Later, during the question and answer session, please do feel free to unmute and turn on your camera. If you would like to receive details of our future mental health webinars, then please post your email address in the chat and I will add you to the mailing list. If you prefer, you can also post privately to me in the chat. Questions. Please feel free during today's interview to write your questions in the chat. During the questions and answers, Ruth and I will answer your questions that are in the chat. So, what led to this webinar today? During September, October, and November last year, I conducted a survey. There were responses from 147 women and 111 men, 99% of them litigation lawyers. The most common kinds of stress reported by these litigation lawyers were anxiety, aggressive opponents, bullying judges, burnout and feeling drained, emotionally demanding clients, fatigue, financial-related stress, medical stress-related problems, self-esteem issues and feelings of inadequacy, pressure, unreasonable judges. 74% of the respondents said they would find it helpful to have a safe space where they could debrief emotionally on a regular basis. 79% said they would like to acquire skills to help them regain emotional equilibrium during or after a difficult court case. 79% expressed interest in participating in a webinar about this subject with an experienced trial lawyer and experienced clinical psychologist. Ruth, would you please introduce yourself and tell us about your relevant experience in the context of litigation lawyers and our challenges with stress and mental well-being?
Thanks very much, Doris. Hi, everyone. I'm Ruth Ancer. I'm a clinical psychologist. I originally qualified and worked as a social worker and subsequently trained as a clinical psychologist. I grew up in a household with lawyers, and I grew up listening to stories of trials and court cases as my father worked as an advocate. My professional involvement in legal matters began as a social worker when I worked in children's homes, and I worked with issues around child abuse, child protection, and taking guardianship of children removed from their parents. After qualifying as a psychologist, I began doing medical legal assessments along with my therapeutic work. And the medical legal assessments were in personal injury and medical negligence cases. I now have 22 years experience as an expert witness, and I've been involved in a number of cases in this capacity. As a therapist, I've also worked with many lawyers, and many of them litigation lawyers. I've developed an understanding of the complexities and the unique pressures that litigation lawyers face. And that you know, the pressures between their work and home often does lead to burnout. What I found in my practice is those very personality traits that make you a successful lawyer also make you vulnerable to burnout and associated difficulties. The majority of my lawyer clients find that their professional environment often feels overwhelming. Almost all of the litigation lawyers I've seen over the years have expressed their appreciation for a space where they can just speak openly and let their guard down, as there's so much pressure to pretend you're fine all the time, to pretend you're stronger than your opponent, and putting on a confident exterior is often exhausting. A constant theme is dealing with burnout. I recall one lawyer saying that even finding time to just breathe can feel difficult. Many are constantly working overtime. They're dealing with strict deadlines and they're holding themselves to unrealistic expectations. So the combination of success being based on billable hours and results, overwhelming workloads, a very low margin for error, and the constant pressure to feel calm and in control all contribute to stress and anxiety. So dealing with difficult and challenging clients, intimidating opposing counsels, bosses who may be good lawyers but have limited emotional intelligence, and even more limited social skills sometimes are also common themes. Some of my clients subconsciously sabotage their careers. They don't respond to emails from their seniors and they miss important meetings. And when I ask how they'd feel if they were fired, a common answer is relief. Another common theme with the litigation lawyers I've worked with is they have very high expectations of themselves. No matter how hard they try, they often feel like something's not quite right. Constantly feeling they don't believe that they don't deserve their position at work, always needing to demonstrate their value, and sometimes seeing achievements as just being lucky. And this is what we call imposter syndrome. And imposter syndrome causes added anxiety and stress with the sense that you're going to be found out. A former litigation lawyer explained to me why they changed the type of law they were involved in. And they said the following. So the thing about litigation that makes it incredibly stressful is it's the only thing in your life where you're actually trying to be as difficult as possible. And you're also trying to make as few mistakes as possible. Any error, any oversight is going to be jumped on by the other side. This is different from other environments, like when you make mistakes in a cooperative environment. People actually try and correct others' mistakes and help you to sort things out. So if you're in education or a therapist, you're trying and repairing things. As a litigator, you're trying to make the other side's life worse. You need them to lose. And it was so confrontational that some of my colleagues seemed to do this easily. I couldn't. Also with clients who couldn't afford to be engaged in litigation, then every single minor setback was actually catastrophic. Like every single preliminary cost order felt like a disaster. I was always concerned about the negative possibilities for the client. That made it incredibly stressful. And that so much is unpredictable, and you can never anticipate exactly what's going to happen. There's so much you can't control. Also, showing any weakness was a no-no. You had to fight hard. I couldn't divorce myself from some of my clients' circumstances, and identifying with some of my clients just made it much harder. You also have to be okay with people who are going to hate you, like maybe your opponent or your opponent's clients, and sometimes even the judge. I sometimes behaved in ways that made other people hate me. And while some of my colleagues didn't seem to care much if people didn't like them, it never sat easily with me. It all became too much. So that's what they said. So essentially, from my work with litigation lawyers, I've become aware of the following. You are dealing with a constantly competitive environment. You're dealing with very unique stresses and pressures. You're navigating complex power dynamics, long hours that lead to conflict between your work and your personal life, and the risk of burnout. Pressure for more billable hours and anxiety about what counts as billable, excessive and extensive client demands, psychologically unsafe workplaces, and working under intense pressure from multiple stakeholders, each with their own demands, and having to communicate with people from all walks of life. And really difficult is the cost of failure is very high and not in your control.
Thank you, Ruth. Now I will briefly introduce myself and share my relevant experience. I am Doris Goodenough, an advocate with more than 30 years' experience in civil litigation. In 2013, after 23 years of winning court cases, I collapsed mentally. For 23 years, I had handled the huge pressures of litigation until I couldn't. A death in the family, coupled with extreme burnout, tipped me over the edge. A single mom, I could no longer look after my child. For 8 months, I could not work at all. I couldn't think straight. I couldn't even take in one page of a book. Severe depression and crippling anxiety plagued me. I thought I would never recover, never be able to be a good mom again. Now, 9 years later, by the grace of God, I am mentally well, serene, and I think a better lawyer for having gone through that experience. My daughter is happy and successful, and we have a great relationship. I am so grateful to the people who took me by the hand and led me out of that abyss. I have my life back now, and it is better than ever before. I have been in the trenches of litigation now for more than 30 years. I believe that my experience as a litigation lawyer, combined with my experience of a successful and lasting recovery from burnout and depression, may prove helpful to you, my colleagues, in dealing with the stresses and challenges in your own lives and litigation practices. Ruth, would you share with us some of the research and literature about the subject of litigation lawyer stress and mental health challenges?
Thanks, Doris. Yes, of course. In 2017, Professor Penelope Andrews, who was the Dean of the UCT Law Faculty at the time, reported that she'd received an email from a student. The student noticed a perceived hyper-competitive, overly demanding, and alienating environment. This, he said, was putting the mental health of some of the law students under extreme strain. He said that because of the atmosphere, the use of anti-anxiety and antidepressant medication had become the norm amongst law students, and alcohol was being consumed in alarming proportions, more alarming proportions than amongst students in general, which often is alarming proportions. As a result, she wondered if there was something about law in particular that drives its students to mental health problems and substance abuse. She then began an investigation into the issue of mental health amongst law students, specifically looking at South Africa. Though most of the rigorous scientific research on the subject has been conducted in the US, it does offer some valuable insight into what's driving the issue and how it may be addressed. The American media has drawn attention to issues of substance abuse and mental health amongst both law students and lawyers. A study by the American Psychology Association showed that lawyers are 3.6 times more likely to suffer from depression than non-lawyers. In 2014, there was a comprehensive study called the Survey of Law Student Wellbeing, and it was conducted at 15 law schools throughout the US. The study found that a quarter to a third of law students reported misuse of alcohol and drugs, as well as experiencing mental health problems. And what was particularly disturbing about the findings was that a sizable group of the students who were experiencing problems were reluctant to seek help. They said that the factors that were identified as stopping them from seeking help included social stigma, potential threats to job status, financial reasons, and the idea that they could handle the problem themselves, or they just didn't have time. It's been 6 years since Professor Andrews wrote that article, so I looked to see if there'd been any published South African studies on this issue since then, and I couldn't locate any. There have, however, again, been a number of international studies, and they reveal that a greater percentage of lawyers experience psychological distress than the general population. It's been found that lawyers are in remarkably poor mental health, with a high incidence of depression, alcoholism, illegal drug use, and divorce than almost any other profession. A 2016 study of almost 13,000 licensed employed attorneys in America showed substantial rates of behavioral health problems. And confirming the studies that I quoted before, 20.6% screened positives for hazardous, harmful, and potentially alcohol-dependent drinking. Levels of depression, anxiety, and stress amongst attorneys were significant, with 28%, 19%, and 23% experiencing symptoms of depression, anxiety, and stress, respectively. Someone I worked with made the following remarks. Before studying law, I worked at a bookshop. When I got home at about 7 at night, I either went home to chill or I went jolling with friends. I didn't have a single thought about stocking bookshelves or customers or sales figures. But practicing law isn't like that. If I'm dealing with a pro bono matter or dealing with child custody, or if my client is in danger of a significant risk for an adverse judgment, that worries me. I can't fall asleep, or I wake up in the middle of the night worrying about what might happen in a case. Studies have looked at why people who tend to choose law as a profession may be more prone to stress, why lawyers and law students are often reluctant to seek help in managing stress, and how the dynamics of law practice contribute to stress. A certain level of intelligence is necessary to become a lawyer. Individuals with an IQ lower than 115, which accounts for about 85% of the population, who don't have that, whose IQs are lower than 115, they have difficulty succeeding in law school. Because the legal profession is a demanding career, it tends to attract individuals who are motivated, intelligent, and ambitious. And studies of lawyers confirm this and show that lawyers are more achievement-orientated, more aggressive, and more competitive than other professionals and people in general. Lawyers, compared to the general population, disproportionately represent what we call the thinking type, rather than the feeling type. The lawyer personality, inverted commas, appears to exacerbate lawyer distress by making it less likely that attorneys will seek help when they need it. Most attorneys are self-reliant, ambitious, perfectionistic, and highly motivated to provide good service to their clients. As a group, however, attorneys are amongst the last to seek assistance or to even acknowledge a problem. The 2016 study that I mentioned found that the two most common barriers in seeking help were not wanting others to find out they needed help and concerns regarding privacy or confidentiality. In a 2012 British study of 1,000 lawyers, 70% of whom said they experienced their workplace as stressful, 2/3 said they would be concerned about reporting feelings of stress to an employer. Dynamics within the legal profession compounds lawyers' reluctance to seek help. Lawyers understandably worry about their professional reputation in a tough market. If clients know that their lawyer is in psychological distress or suffering from substance abuse, they'll look for other counsel. And what will your partner say if you check into rehab? Who will manage your cases and deadlines? And will depression or substance abuse lead to disciplinary hearings with the bar? As Robert Thornhill, director of Alabama's Lawyers Assistance Program, notes, the fear of damaging their reputation is pervasive and keeps many attorneys from receiving the assistance and treatment they need. The lifestyle lawyers experience also leads to stress. Practicing law entails long hours. The average associate in private practice in America bills just over 2,000 hours per year. And because not every hour worked can be billed, it takes about 3,000 hours of work per year to bill 2,000 hours annually. So to work 3,000 hours per year requires working 58 hours per week, 52 weeks a year. In the past few years, the billing pressure on lawyers has intensified as more firms evaluate their lawyers internally for purposes of setting salaries, bonuses, and other perks, which are based upon fees collected from clients, not just fees billed. So excessive workloads are a leading cause of lawyers' disproportionately high rates of stress and associated difficulties. The unpredictable and adversarial nature of practicing law adds stress. You often experience unpredictable outcomes and difficult cases, clients, difficult colleagues, and difficult adversaries. And dealing with difficult clients, opponents, and co-workers can leave you feeling emotionally shattered. Angus Lyon, who is a British solicitor and a psychotherapist and an author of a book on lawyers and stress, concurs. And he says, "I learned long ago never to wrestle with a pig. You get dirty, and besides, the pig likes it." In summary, the following factors contribute to the stress felt by many lawyers in the practice of law. Lawyers tend to be type A personalities who push themselves to excel and who are reluctant to seek help for stress-related issues. What lawyers do matters to clients, to one's colleagues, and often to the public. Other people rely on you being right and excellent in everything you do. There's a lot of pressure to want to perform well on tasks that are often challenging and difficult. There's a constant need to meet billing quotas, develop clients, demonstrate value, and update your skills to meet a changing marketplace. And the fact that the pressures in law don't taper off as you advance in your career. And then, of course, dynamics within the legal profession that further discourage attorneys from seeking help. However, it is important to note that the stress inherent in challenging work and the desire to perform well can also provide a sense of purpose and achievement. So for this reason, stress is not necessarily bad. The goal is not to eliminate stress, but to manage it.
Thank you very much, Ruth. I can share on a personal note, my own journey of recovery has been a winding road, and I'm still walking it every day. But I am now a more emotionally stable, happy, and contented person, and I believe a more effective advocate than I was before my nervous breakdown. The tools that I have implemented on my journey of recovery. I will tell you more about these in the course of my future webinars, and I will also be interviewing some of the professional people who have helped me to recover. In short, I'm in ongoing therapy with a clinical psychologist. I belong to a support group. In addition, there are 2 trusted, wise people in my life with whom I feel totally safe, and I know that they accept me exactly as I am. I trust their wisdom and judgment, and I regularly speak to them and ask for their input and guidance. Sometimes I just need to vent, and I feel safe to do that, knowing I will not be judged. This has helped me very much in my recovery. I also practice intensive self-care, including prayer and meditation, ample rest, and sound nutrition. And please don't let this go any further. Some afternoons I even take a nap for an hour. And I find that 1 hour's nap gives rich dividends because I can actually work more productively later in the afternoon and in the evening. I have learned ways of making my litigation work more emotionally manageable than before. More emotionally manageable before, during, and after a court case. And I will share those techniques with you in later webinars. So, Ruth, please tell us, what exactly is stress and what strategies have some of your lawyer clients found works best for them?
I've thought about the strategies that people who successfully cope with stress have used, and I'm going to describe some of them. But what I've found is that people who understand how our stress response works have been more successful at finding ways to deal with it. So just to describe it very simply and briefly, stress is the way your body responds to potential dangers. When your brain notices a threat, it releases a flood of hormones, adrenaline and cortisol. And this increases alertness. It increases your heart rate and blood flow to your muscles. Stress is not inherently bad for you. It's a biological response designed to help us escape threatening situations. So it gave us the energy and the motivation to run away from the saber-toothed tiger that would have eaten us if we just, smiled at them. So it's your natural fight or flight response that's kept us alive for thousands of years. Now, in an ideal world, your body responds to stress and then returns to its normal state. But in a less than ideal world, like the world we are currently functioning in, stress can become chronic rather than temporary. So these are the primary techniques that many of my clients have found helpful. And the first one invokes the relaxation response. The relaxation response is the opposite of the stress response. It's a state of profound rest that can be elicited in many ways. With regular practice, you create a well of calm that you can dip into as the need arises. There are many techniques that help evoke this relaxation response, and it's about finding what works for you. So these techniques include breath focus, body scan, guided imagery, mindfulness meditation, and also practices such as yoga or Tai Chi. There are many apps that will describe and assist you with these techniques. Another very effective way of managing stress, and we all know this, is regular physical activity. Daily exercise produces stress-relieving hormones. The next one is what we spend a lot of time in therapy speaking about, or what I spend a lot of time in therapy speaking about with clients. It's about knowing your triggers, understanding which are the triggers that cause you stress. So what is it that presses your buttons? The stress buttons, that is. So identifying the type of situations that make you feel out of control. Understanding your triggers will make it easier to develop personalized ways to deal with stress and experiment with various ways to deal with them. When you know what your triggers are, when you understand where they come from, you can avoid these situations or manage them better. Really important too is taking time to connect with friends and family, reaching out to others and maintaining a social support system, managing and prioritizing your tasks, so planning ahead to avoid feeling rushed. You establish systems where you address the most important tasks first and gradually work your way through the ones of lesser importance. At one point when I was dealing with stress well, what I did was I worked out what were the tasks that were giving me the most stress and that I was most avoiding. And I started with those. That worked so well, but I only did it for a short while, and then I stopped. And then a crucial strategy, which very few of us do well enough, and this is what Doris mentioned, intensive self-care. This includes eating healthy foods, because this reduces your stress triggers and also stabilizes your mood. Getting decent sleep. I mean, we all know that, and it's really hard for us to do because with anxiety and with stress, it affects our sleep. Taking breaks, laughing more. Don't underestimate the benefits of humor. I use it as a very successful technique, and I will continue to. Giving up unhelpful habits, and then engaging in hobbies you enjoy and intentionally setting time to do this. So my life actually changed last year when I decided to finally learn to crochet. I've been putting it off for years, and finally I just decided to take the plunge. And I don't know why or how, but the stress-reducing benefits of crocheting are seriously impressive. And now my friends and relatives will all be getting crocheted scarves for their birthdays for the next few years. Setting boundaries, learning to say no to things that are not a high priority, and asking for help when you need it. Now, I doubt any of the above strategies are new to you. I know you've heard all of this before, which is why I'm not going to spend additional time just listing more strategies that I've done or that my clients have done, because we all know what to do, but we don't do it. So I'd like you to reflect on the following questions. I'll pause after each one, and we can email this to you if you'd like, but I'd encourage you to think about these questions and make notes after the webinar, so it's a starting point for you to work from. So the first one, what have you done to cope with your stress that has helped. Things that you've done in the past that you might have stopped doing, things that you currently do. So things that you have found effective. The second question is, what have you done or what do you do to cope with stress that is self-defeating? Our brains are actually wired for pleasure. So we often will do things to distract us or to minimize the stress, but it's things that actually just cause further stress and more difficulties. So those are the self-defeating ones. Then what realistically could you and should you put in place to manage your stress? And then most crucially, what are the obstacles? What has stopped you from putting these in place? Or what has stopped you from maintaining the ones that started working for you? And what might prevent you from putting this in place again, or to start putting things in place? And then what do you need to overcome these obstacles? The real work is about developing self-awareness so you can understand what stops you from taking care of yourself. Once you identify the source of what's holding you back, once you identify your obstacles and your resistance, you can work on ways around them. And then, so crucially, is being willing to accept support in that process, wherever that support comes from. So the type of work and thought process that this involves isn't exercised much in the work that you do, where you primarily are using your intellect. This is about developing the insight, but then making the connection between your intellectual and your emotional processes. And these are some of the issues that will be addressed in the webinars that Doris and I are hosting.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Okay, support groups. Beginning in February, that's next month, Ruth and I will be co-hosting regular support groups designed specifically to fulfill the needs of litigation lawyers. Ruth will lead these support groups. Ruth, would you please tell the viewers what a support group is and what they can expect in a session if they participate in a support group?
I will, Doris, but I just remembered I spoke about humor. And there's something I want to read to you before I go on to the support groups. It's part of strategies. If you can sit quietly after difficult news, if in financial downturns you remain perfectly calm, I'm reading it from my phone, apologies. If you can see your neighbors travel to fantastic places without a twinge of jealousy, if you can happily eat whatever is put on your plate, if you can fall asleep after a day of running around without a drink or a pill, if you can always find contentment just where you are probably a dog. And that's from Jack Cornfield. Okay, thank you. So we are talking about support groups. A support group is a place to receive support from and give support to others who are dealing with similar issues. Because of the confidential nature of the group, it's a safe place to get guidance and advice that's practical, constructive, and helpful. So you'll have the benefit of encouragement, reassurance, and through shared experiences, you'll learn more about coping with specific difficulties that have come up in your practice. You'll develop insight and personal growth, which leads to feeling empowered and also can improve your confidence. Support groups also lead to decrease feelings of isolation as you're hearing from others who are facing similar challenges. So I'll be facilitating the group process and Doris will be providing input from her experience. We're going to be running both in-person groups and online groups. Groups will be run every second week on 1 hour each. You're going to sign up for a set of 4 sessions. Groups will be limited to 10 participants. We're happy to answer any further questions at the end about the way that the groups work.
Thank you, Ruth. I will also, before the end of this meeting, post the link to a SurveyMonkey survey, which is intended to gain your information, so you can take a minute to fill it in if you would like to join a support group. So my role in a support group session is this. I'm also sitting there with you, listening to what you are sharing. I may then draw on my own similar experiences in the litigation world. I may share a perspective that could be useful to you in dealing constructively with the stressful litigation type experience that you are going through. Webinars. Ruth and I will be presenting a series of 4 paid webinars during February and March, and possibly the early in April. These 4 webinars are designed to be attended as one course, but you may choose to attend only one or more. Ruth, would you please tell the viewers what will be covered in these 4 webinars?
Sure. Okay. So in the first webinar, we're going to be looking at dealing with high conflict people, and Doris will share her experience and what she's learned about how to deal with high conflict people. And I'll give suggestions based on my professional knowledge and experience. And as we know that in law practices, they can be a magnet for high conflict people. You know, clients are coming to you at times of crisis. And when people are stressed, they are not, you're not getting them in their optimal state of calmness and happiness. So high conflict people are going to be right in your face, and those who are normally not might turn into it. So we're going to look at also how to identify high conflict people and behavior, and then how to manage it. In the second webinar, we're going to be learning to understand your triggers that I mentioned earlier, and just being able to identify what your triggers are, understand where they come from, and then becoming more self-aware so that you can manage them and improve your way of dealing with stressful experiences. The third webinar is we're going to be looking at the obstacles which hold you back from practicing self-care. So that is aimed to get you beyond the barriers of knowing all the strategies, but just saying, you know, I just don't get to it. And then in the final webinar, we're going to talk about how to build your resilience, so to help you deal better with difficult, stressful experiences. So those are the broad outlines of the webinars that we're going to be running.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Now is your time, people who are attending this webinar, to ask questions. So first, let me see if there are any questions in the chat, because we will deal with those first. And after that, if there is still time, then I will invite you to raise your hands and ask questions orally. I don't seem to be many typed questions here.
There has been a lovely response from Hugh.
Yes, I saw that was lovely. Do you want to read it out, Ruth? Or
sure. Thanks so much, Hugh, for this. So Hugh's written exercise, yoga especially, swimming, and walks with a close friend, prayer, involvement in a charitable trust of which I'm a trustee. Giving financial assistance and emotional support to others is so humbling and makes one appreciative of what one has. Having a group of friends and chatting over a few drinks. Watching sports with friends. I travel regularly and I'm stimulated by meeting new people and experiencing the beautiful world in which we are blessed to live. These are some of my techniques and activities to deal with lots of stress. That's wonderful. And I think you touch on a few things that are so important. For example, just feeling gratitude. And I'm not talking about Oprah's, gratitude journals, which I'm not dismissing, but just being able to sometimes look at, because I think we tend to see everything from such a bleak perspective, and being able to look and just change your lens is so useful. And also what you said about being involved in charitable organizations, being able to feel that you're also doing things that are meaningful and assisting other people can be a source of and you shouldn't just assist other people because it's good for you, but actually it's very, very rewarding to know that you're able to balance what you're doing, but with also knowing that what you're doing is so helpful. So I love what you've put. Thank you. Okay, there is another comment.
There's one by Sherry Lee. She says, it appears that the stress-inducing events mentioned in this webinar are depicted as outside stresses. In my experience, inside stresses are the real problems. Disinterested, hang on, I've missed
unreliable
support staff or candidate legal practitioners. One cannot, after all, run a legal practice without being able to rely on support staff. Absolutely. Yeah, Sherry Lee, I can relate to that as a former, previously having been an attorney. It's incredibly stressful not to have the support that you are entitled to expect from your staff. Jan Nell says, please let us have both your email addresses. I've put mine. Ruth, if you feel comfortable, then please feel free to put yours in the chat.
I'm pressing something incorrectly. Let me just get back to the chat. So mine is just my name and surname at Gmail, but I will put it as ruthancer@gmail.com.
Thank you, Ruth. Michelle says she plays netball, which assists with the exercise of at least releasing the stress. Some days it assists, others do not. Yeah, I must say, I also find personally that exercise is wonderful, but it can also cause additional stress if I'm already sort of burdened. So I need to sort of have a menu of stress coping techniques. And Kelly Mamalo says, what would you encourage us as juniors to do when you have so many commitments hanging over you and you just can't keep up? Ruth, do you want to start?
Yes. Oh, it's so hard because when you're junior, it's almost like your life is taken over by what you're expected to do. And I think it's about prioritizing and getting support. And I think the most important thing is by having people that you can talk to, finding a mentor. So not your superior who's kind of evaluating you, but a mentor that you trust and that has your back. Because I think that there is a reality that as a junior, you are going to be dealing with huge expectations. And I don't know how much room you have to set boundaries. So it would be also about setting boundaries where you can, where you're not going to lose your job. And that might be setting boundaries with friends, setting boundaries with difficult people, family members, because I think sometimes you have to also be strategic. Setting boundaries and being assertive is important, but you can't do it at the risk if there's going to be a really adverse risk. And that is why you've got to find people who know what you're going through, who can assist. So I think it's about finding outlets and finding supports. And often that is through other people.
Thank you, Ruth. Kelly, I relate from personal experience to what you're sharing. The challenge with being a junior advocate is that you get thrown briefs, the night before for a trial the next morning, and one doesn't want to say no because, the attorneys will then brief someone else. The reason why it's so important to find a solution, whatever it is, I have found, is that if I'm flooded like that, that's when I make mistakes and errors of judgment. I am actually only one person. And I actually believe that I owe it to not only myself, but to the attorneys and to the clients to learn to say no. And if I choose to set that boundary, painful and scary though it is, I actually end up attracting a better kind of clientele because I then show my commitment to quality of work rather than quantity. And I know it's very much easier to talk than to do. And I also definitely intend to deal with that problem in future webinars. Advocate Moketsi Pansi says the culture of addressing judges as my lord sometimes makes them be more bullying than they would ordinarily be if we were simply addressing them as Mr. and Miss so-and-so. I think you've got a point there.
I absolutely have to agree. I think this hierarchy can make for a very bullying, intimidating environment. And it's so difficult because they have so much power. I absolutely agree with you.
And Willie Buitendorf says, I've learned that effective communication can have a huge impact on this. We often assume what people must know when we want what we want, when it is not necessarily so.
Oh, that is so important. And there are some attorneys whose communication skills are not very good. And it makes it so hard for the people who are working with them. And I think that and basic communication skills, I know people call them soft skills, but they're not soft as in easy. They're sophisticated. And I think you're absolutely right. And communication skills, proper communication skills should be taught at law school. In fact, it should be taught at every level of schooling because it's so fundamental. And I think there are sometimes really, really people with very high IQs in law, but with not great EQs and not great communication skills. And that's something that I've often dealt with on a one-to-one basis of just people also getting very upset. They don't understand why people don't respond well to them. And when I look at how they're speaking to them, they're speaking to them in very tactlessly, very insensitively. And so just learning how to address people, which shows them respect, which makes them clear without being patronizing or condescending, will make, not only people like you, which I know isn't all your goals, but will make people understand you and want to seek you out.
Thank you, Ruth. Geraldine Moya Anderson says, I just want to say thank you for this. I'm absolutely loving the fact that attorneys especially can be helped to go back to soul, recognize triggers and remain calm. We all need love, light and healing as we deal with those who do not have it. We cannot pour from an empty cup. I really want to add my amen to that, Geraldine. It sounds so paradoxical. We're in an adversarial world where we're actually in a war zone. And yet I do believe it is possible and that we can actually radiate positive energy. We can show respect for ourselves and our opponent, even if we strongly disagree with them. We can conduct ourselves in court with dignity and calm. And these things can be achieved. It just takes some practice. And yes, we cannot pour from an empty cup. I really experienced that when I suffered from extreme burnout in 2013. I couldn't do my job properly. So I owe it not only to my clients, to myself, but also to my clients and instructing attorneys and the judges to be, it's like taking your car in for a service every 6 months. I am the machine that is generating this work. I've got to keep the machine in good working order. Michelle says she believes that having a positive attitude helps a lot. Elspeth says that TikTok helps. Advocate Richter says, as a practicing advocate, where do you find professional support? Well, I personally, Advocate Richter, I go to a clinical psychologist with whom I've been for many years. I've also been with other clinical psychologists and other kind of professional people. For me personally, a clinical psychologist with good experience, that is what I need. There are also, of course, the support groups that Ruth and I will be presenting, which I suggest would be a very helpful form of support. And I don't think that we as advocates are any less equipped to find the kind of professional support that we need. Everything you say in the session obviously remains completely confidential. I just want to add another reassuring fact about Ruth and my support groups. We require everyone who joins a support group to sign a confidentiality agreement. And you will readily understand why this is so important. In the support groups, you and your confidentiality is further supported and respected in that nobody is allowed to mention any names of their clients, their judges, their opponents, their colleagues. That is not acceptable. You're simply speaking about your own experience, referring to my client, the judge, my opponent. And so I wanted to say that because our profession is unique in the sense that each one of us, firstly, we owe our clients a legal duty of privilege and confidentiality. And also, we don't want to be sued by anyone for defaming them. So what stays in the session, what is said in the session stays in the session, and you have to sign to commit yourself to that. Janine asks, how do we assist candidate attorneys from falling into the cycle of stress? Ruth?
I mean, I think that's all of the things that we've been speaking about. And also, if you're working with candidate attorneys, to be able to discuss this with them and let them know that if they're not coping, to be able to tell you. So I think it's about making this not a taboo subject, but by speaking on an individual basis to the candidate attorneys and finding out what they've put in place to cope. So I think things like this, talk about, because I think that candidate attorneys, again, as with the juniors, there isn't that much autonomy in terms of what they can do and what they can say no to. And sometimes, I mean, the people I've seen and the people they've had to work with when they were candidate attorneys, and some of them have been lovely, but some have really are still traumatized. So it's also about senior attorneys being able to recognize how to deal with people. And just because you went through it and no one was supportive to you doesn't mean that you should treat people badly. So I actually think there's a cultural, there's a issue with the culture of the law firms, and but I think in terms of on an individual basis, and when candidate attorneys are being brought into firms, to have, to make time to also provide them with support to understand the structures, if they're EAPs, and to allow them to have a space so you don't just find out about how stressed they are after there's been an admission to a rehab facility or after there's been some kind of trauma because they're not coping. So I think it's about opening up this type of conversation. And I would take a recording of this and show it to all your candidate attorneys.
Thank you, Ruth. It's been so interesting. It's now 2 minutes to 5, and the time has flown. So I'm going to put Ruth and my email addresses in the chat again. I, for one, am very happy if you would like to email me to ask the questions that you've posed in this chat. Also, if you would like to be on the mailing list to receive the information about the future webinars, please also put in your email address, and I will email all of that information to you together with the price of the future paid webinars and the details for how you can register for those. Ruth, thank you ever so much for being here. Thank you to everyone who has attended today. I'm actually so happy. We have 204 people attending, and it shows that there's a real need for this kind of thing. Okay, thank you very much, and we hope to see you at our future webinars.
Thanks, Doris. Thanks
Goodbye.
for hosting it. Okay.
Goodbye.
Bye.